January 1936, rural America. Neighbors laughed at his house before the cold ever arrived. They said the roof was wrong, the shape was foolish, and no man could survive an American winter without flat beams, heavy stone, and a roaring fire. While every other home in the area followed tradition, he did the opposite. He built small, he built curved. No chimney, no smoke, no fire burning through the night. When the cold wave hit, temperatures plunged toward 30 degrees C, snow fell day after day, and flat roofs began to carry more weight than wood could hold. Neighbors climbed onto their homes to shovel and never came back down. Fires burned hot and quietly stole the air from sealed rooms. Houses collapsed from the top inward. When the storm finally released its grip, the village was silent, roofs crushed, doors buried, no movement anywhere. And standing in clear daylight, surrounded by snow and ruins, one house remained intact. One man walked out alive. This is not a story about bravery. It's about the one design choice winter in America never forgives. Before anyone talked about storms or temperatures or survival, people talked about the house. It stood at the edge of the village where the land sloped gently upward, small and quiet, already finished, while others were still stacking firewood and repairing roofs. Every other home followed the same pattern that had existed for generations: straight stone walls, flat or slightly angled roofs, heavy beams meant to look strong even when they were already tired, smoke rising from chimneys all day, a sign of warmth and safety that reassured everyone who saw it. Then there was his house. It did not rise proudly above the ground. It crouched. Its roof was not flat, not even angled, but curved smoothly in every direction like a shallow dome. Snow that fell on it never stayed long. It slid, it drifted away. The walls met the roof without corners, without seams that could catch wind or hold weight. There was no chimney, no smoke, no visible fire, just a low entrance and a shape that looked wrong to people who had spent their lives believing winter could be beaten with mass and heat alone. The villagers noticed it immediately. They always did when something broke tradition. At first they stared, then they smiled. Then they laughed. Men stopped on their way back from work to point at the roof and shake their heads. Children threw snowballs at it to see if it would dent or crack. Someone joked that it looked like an animal shelter, not a house meant for a man. Others said it would be the first to collapse once real snow arrived, because it looked thin, because it looked soft, because it did not look serious. Strength to them meant straight lines and weight. Anything curved looked weak. Anything small looked temporary. Anything without fire looked dangerous. What made the laughter louder was how calm the man was. He never argued, never defended the design, never explained himself. When asked why there was no chimney, he simply said nothing. When told that snow would pile up and crush it, he kept working. When warned that winter punished foolishness, he nodded politely and continued smoothing the roof with his hands, shaping it carefully so no part of it was higher or flatter than another. He finished early, weeks before the cold usually arrived in full force. While others rushed to fix cracks and replace beams at the last moment, his house was already sealed, already prepared, already waiting. Snow began to fall lightly at first, just enough to dust the village and soften the edges of rooftops. On the flat roofs, it stayed. On his roof, it slid away in thin sheets. That alone became a source of jokes. People said he was lucky. People said the real snow had not come yet. People said his strange roof would regret it soon. The wind picked up and tested every surface. It pressed hard against walls and corners. It slipped around his house instead of striking it directly. No one noticed that. They were too busy reinforcing what they already trusted. From a distance, the contrast was obvious. Rows of flat-roofed houses holding snow like shelves. One rounded roof shedding it quietly. Smoke thickening in the cold air everywhere except above his home. He was already living inside, calm, moving slowly, conserving effort. Others were burning more wood than usual, telling themselves it was just another winter. They had survived many before. They believed experience was enough. They believed winter followed patterns. They believed tradition was proof. What no one admitted out loud was that winters had been getting heavier, snow stayed longer, cold settled deeper, roofs creaked more often than they used to. People joked about it because joking was easier than changing. His house made that discomfort visible. It suggested that maybe the old ways were not perfect, that maybe winter had rules no one wanted to study. That suggestion alone was enough to make people laugh harder. By the time the first heavy snowfall arrived, the house had become a landmark. The round one, people called it, the foolish one, the one that won't last. They said it would teach him a lesson. They said winter always corrects arrogance. What they did not understand was that the house was not built from arrogance at all. It was built from observation, from watching how snow moved, from noticing how wind behaved, from understanding that winter does not attack straight down. It attacks sideways and slowly and without mercy. The house did not challenge winter. It avoided it. As the days grew colder, the laughter faded into routine. Everyone returned to their preparations. Roofs were cleared again and again. Fires burned longer. Doors were sealed tighter. The strange house remained unchanged. Snow continued to slide off its curved surface, piling harmlessly around it instead of on top of it. No one took that seriously. They assumed the real test had not begun. They were right about one thing. The real test had not begun yet. But when it did, it would not care about tradition or confidence or laughter. It would only care about shape, weight, wind, and time. And long before anyone understood that, the strange little house with the round roof was already ready, standing quietly in plain daylight, waiting for winter to decide who was right. The laughter did not stop once the house was finished. If anything, it grew louder as winter moved closer, because the longer nothing went wrong, the more confident the villagers became that they were right, and he was wrong. Every morning, smoke rose from their chimneys in thick grey columns, proof that fires were burning and life was continuing, as it always had. Men gathered near doorways, stamping snow from their boots, talking about how much wood they would need this year and whose roof might need reinforcing first. Whenever the conversation slowed, someone would glance toward the edge of the village and smirk, because the strange house was impossible to ignore. Its rounded roof stood out even more once snow covered everything else. It made the straight lines of the other houses look rigid and tired, but no one interpreted that as a warning. They interpreted it as foolishness made visible. They said the man was tempting winter. They said he thought he was smarter than everyone else. They said people who ignored tradition always paid for it when the cold arrived in earnest. Children turned the house into a joke. They dared each other to climb onto the lower edge of the roof and slide off when snow made it slick. They laughed when they saw how easily the snow moved, how it never stayed in place. Adults laughed too, but differently, with the quiet confidence of people who believed experience mattered more than curiosity. They had survived many winters in these same houses. They had lost animals, suffered shortages, repaired damage, and buried neighbors before. Winter was dangerous, yes, but it was familiar. Familiarity bred certainty. Certainty bred dismissal. No one wanted to admit that something new might be necessary. The man felt the isolation more sharply as the days passed. He was no longer invited to share meals or sit near fires. Conversations stopped when he approached. Advice was offered loudly so others could hear it, never privately, never kindly. They told him he would regret not building thicker walls. They told him he would freeze without fire. They told him snow was heavier than he thought, that it crushed even strong roofs, and that his curved shape would make no difference when real weight arrived. He listened without reacting. He had learned long ago that explanations only made mockery sharper. Silence confused people less. He went on adjusting small details, smoothing surfaces, sealing gaps, making sure no part of the roof invited snow to rest. From a distance it looked like obsession. From inside his mind it was necessity. As winter deepened, the tone of the village shifted from laughter to tension, though no one named it. Snow fell more often than usual, not heavily yet, but persistently. Roofs stayed white longer. Clearing them became a daily chore instead of a weekly one. Firewood piles shrank faster than expected. Smoke hung low in the cold air and lingered instead of dispersing. Inside the houses, corners stayed colder no matter how much wood was burned. People complained about headaches, about thick air, about waking up tired even after long sleep. They blamed the season. They blamed age. They blamed nothing specific at all. Through all of this, the strange house changed very little. Snow continued to slide off the roof in slow sheets. Wind curled around it instead of slamming into it. The man spent most of his time inside now, moving slowly, conserving effort, letting the shelter do the work it was designed to do. From the outside, it looked inactive, almost abandoned. That only reinforced the belief that it was wrong. A house, people believed, should show signs of struggle in winter. Smoke meant warmth, noise meant life. His house showed neither. The first real argument happened when someone accused him of refusing to help the village. They said that by building differently, he was insulting everyone else, suggesting that their homes were inadequate. He did not respond. He did not say that winter was not personal. He did not say that snow had no respect for tradition. He did not say that buildings fail quietly long before they collapse. He simply closed his door and let the cold settle outside. That silence hardened opinions. It was easier to laugh at someone who did not defend himself than to question one's own choices. By the time the sky began to change, no one was paying attention to the signs. The air grew heavier again. Wind shifted direction and stayed there. Animals became restless. Snow stopped melting during the day. Roofs creaked under weight that was still considered manageable. People told each other that the worst always came later, that this was only the beginning, and that they were prepared. They had always been prepared. The strange house stood quietly at the edge of the village, its roof already carrying and shedding snow without complaint. The man remained inside, waiting, while laughter slowly gave way to unease. The storm that would decide everything had not arrived yet, but winter had already begun separating belief from reality. Long before the strange house appeared at the edge of the village, before the laughter and the pointing and the certainty that winter would prove him wrong, the man had lived exactly as everyone else did. He had built a normal house, straight walls, flat roof. Heavy stone meant to last generations. He had believed the same things they believed, that thickness was strength, that fire was safety, that if a house looked solid enough it would protect what mattered inside it. He had a wife then. He had a young son. The boy was small for his age and sick more often in winter, coughing through the nights, waking with shallow breaths when the cold settled deep into the house. Each winter, the man burned more wood than the last, feeding the fire, until the air grew thick and heavy, until smoke lingered low near the ceiling, until the warmth felt uneven hot near the stove, and bitter in the corners, where cold always seemed to hide. He noticed how the cold gathered there first, how it crept downward at night, how no amount of fire ever fully chased it away. He noticed the roof too, how snow sat on it for days, pressing down silently, how beams groaned under weight long before anyone admitted there was danger. At the time, he told himself this was normal. Everyone lived this way. Everyone survived. The boy did not grow stronger. Each winter weakened him a little more. Medicine was scarce. Firewood was expensive. The man asked neighbors for help once, quietly, not begging, just asking if they had extra wood, extra warmth, extra time. They refused without cruelty, but without kindness either. Winter was hard for everyone. Each family guarded what little they had. That was the rule. That was survival. One night, during a stretch of deep cold, the fire burned low while the man slept. The air in the house grew stale and heavy. The roof creaked as snow shifted above. By morning, the boy's breathing had slowed into something shallow and wrong. He did not cry out. He did not struggle. Winter took him quietly, the way it always does. The man did not scream. He sat for a long time and stared upward, not at the fire, not at the walls, but at the ceiling that had failed to protect the space beneath it. The wife never recovered from that winter. She moved through the house differently afterward, slower, colder, as if part of her had stayed buried with the child. Another season came, then another. Snow returned heavier each year, fire burned longer, smoke lingered thicker. The roof held, but only barely. During a particularly heavy snowfall, the man woke in the night to the sound of wood shifting above him, a deep, strained noise that made his chest tighten. He stood in the dark and imagined the weight pressing down, imagined the roof collapsing inward, imagined winter sealing the house from the outside. That winter took his wife as well. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, as cold and exhaustion and grief hollowed her out. The village offered sympathy then. They brought words, they brought quiet looks. They did not bring answers. After that, the man stopped rebuilding the same house. He stopped trusting what had already failed him. He began watching winter instead of fighting it. He noticed how snow behaved on hills, how it slid instead of piling up. He noticed how animals sheltered themselves without fire, without straight lines, without corners that trapped cold. He watched wind curl and move, how it struck flat surfaces hard but flowed gently around rounded ones. He thought about the nights when smoke had filled his home and stolen air while he believed it was saving them. He thought about weight, about pressure, about how winter attacked slowly and sideways, not all at once. By the time spring arrived, he no longer believed that tradition meant safety. He believed that winter followed rules, and those rules did not care how long a house design had been used. When he began building again, it was not out of confidence or pride. It was out of loss. Every curve he shaped into the roof was deliberate. Every corner he removed was intentional. Every flat surface he avoided was a memory of snow pressing down where it should never have been allowed to sit. He built smaller because space wasted heat. He built lower because earth did not move or complain. He built without fire because fire had lied to him before. When the villagers laughed at the finished house, they saw only the shape. They did not see the winters behind it. They did not see the son who never made it through the cold. They did not see the wife who faded one winter at a time. They did not see that the house was not strange at all. It was the result of a man who had already lost everything winter could take and who refused to lose again. The storm did not arrive with drama. It arrived with persistence. Snow began falling in thick, steady sheets that did not stop when night came and did not ease when morning returned. Wind followed soon after, not in violent bursts, but in constant pressure that pushed snow sideways, packing it hard against walls, doors, and roofs. At first, the village treated it like every other heavy snowfall. Men climbed onto flat roofs with shovels, scraping away what they could, telling each other it was better to stay ahead of the weight. Fires burned hotter, smoke thickened. Doors were opened and closed constantly as people checked on one another. No one panicked. Panic came later. By the second day, the snow was no longer loose. Wind had compressed it into dense layers that behaved like wet concrete. Roofs that had been cleared the night before were white again by morning, carrying more weight than before. Beams began to complain. Not loudly, just enough to be noticed in quiet moments, a deep, strained sound that settled into the chest. Men went back onto the roofs, burning strength and calories with every shovel load, slipping on ice, breathing hard in air already thinned by cold and smoke. Some roofs bowed slightly, just enough to look wrong. People told themselves they would hold they always had. Inside the flat roof houses, the air grew dangerous. Chimneys clogged with snow and ice, trapping smoke that had nowhere to go. Fires meant warmth, but they also meant oxygen disappearing minute by minute. Windows stayed sealed. Doors stayed shut. People grew tired faster than they should have. Headaches became common. Breathing felt heavy. No one connected these signs to danger because fire had always been their ally. They trusted it even as it quietly worked against them. The man with the round roof did none of this. He did not climb onto his shelter. He did not clear snow. He did not burn firewood or feed flames. He stayed inside and waited. Snow hit the curved roof and slid away, shedding weight continuously instead of collecting it. Wind wrapped around the structure instead of striking it head-on. There were no corners for cold to pull in, no flat surfaces to invite pressure. The shelter disappeared slowly as snow piled around it. Not on it, turning the house into part of the landscape rather than a target. Inside, the temperature stabilized, not warm but steady, safe. His movements were minimal. He ate little. He slept in short cycles. He let the design do what it was meant to do. By the third day, the village began to fail. One roof collapsed inward without warning, burying a family beneath snow and timber before anyone could reach them. Another followed hours later. People tried to dig from the outside, but the snow collapsed back into the holes as quickly as it was removed. Wind erased footprints in minutes. Men sent to help neighbors lost direction and froze within sight of their own homes. Animals suffocated in barns as snow sealed every opening. Panic arrived at last, and panic burned what little strength people had left. The man inside the curved shelter heard none of this clearly. Sound was muted beneath the snow. Pressure replaced noise. He felt the storm more than he heard it, a constant weight above and around him that never sharpened into threat. He did not know who had survived and who had not. He only knew that the shelter was holding exactly as it was supposed to. Snow continued to slide. Wind continued to pass. Time slowed. By the fifth day, the village was no longer a village. It was a field of white, broken only by roof beams and chimney tops jutting out at unnatural angles. Inside many homes, the fire had burned until oxygen ran out. Inside others, the roof had failed before anyone could escape. The storm had taken its measure carefully, punishing flat surfaces, rewarding curves, collapsing what resisted, and sparing what yielded. When the snowfall finally weakened, it did not announce itself. Wind softened, pressure eased, silence returned in layers. The man did not leave his shelter immediately. He waited one more day, understanding that winter kills most often when people move too soon. Inside his curved roof house, buried and intact, he remained alive while everything built on confidence and tradition lay crushed beneath the snow. Winter had made its decision, not loudly, not cruelly, but with the calm certainty of physics doing exactly what it always does. He did not step outside as soon as the storm ended, because the end of noise is not the end of danger. And he had learned that winter saves its final mistakes for the moment people believe they are safe. He waited until the pressure above him felt lighter, until the air at the entrance no longer pushed back, until silence became clean instead of heavy. And only then did he begin to dig upwards, slowly, carefully carving a narrow path through snow that had compacted into something closer to stone than ice. When daylight finally broke through, it was pale and colorless, not warm, not welcoming, just proof that the world still existed above him. As he emerged, the village did not look damaged, it looked erased. Roofs were gone, walls were buried. Familiar paths had vanished beneath smooth white ground that gave no hint of what lay underneath. Chimneys stuck out at odd angles like markers for graves no one had time to name. There was no smoke, no movement, no sound at all, and the absence of life felt heavier than the storm itself. He walked slowly, conserving strength, scanning the snow for shapes that did not belong, for signs of houses that had once stood where nothing now remained, and everywhere he looked, he saw the same pattern repeated again and again. Flat roofs collapsed inward, beams snapped under weight. They were never meant to carry. Doors sealed from the outside so completely that no one inside could have escaped even if they had known when to try. Animals lay frozen where they had stood, packed tightly together in shelters that became traps. And the deeper he went into the village, the clearer it became that survival had not been random or fair. It had been decided quietly by shape, by airflow, by weight distribution, by choices made long before the first snow fell. When he finally stopped and turned back toward his own shelter, it stood there, unchanged, small and rounded, half-buried but intact, its roof still curved, still shedding what little snow slid down its sides, and for a moment the contrast was almost unbearable, not because he had survived, but because he understood why. There was no triumph in that understanding, no relief that felt clean, only the heavy knowledge that the lesson had cost more than it ever should have, that people he had known and spoken to and shared winters with had trusted the same designs that had failed him once before and paid the same price. He stood in clear daylight beside the house everyone had mocked, surrounded by silence where a village used to be, and there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove, because winter had already done that work for him, choosing not the strongest walls or the loudest fires, but the one structure that had been willing to bend, to shed weight, to wait, and to let winter pass without fighting it. In the days that followed, the truth settled in more slowly than the snow had. Rescue came late and cautiously, men moving across the frozen surface as if the ground itself might give way, stepping unknowingly over buried rooms, over roofs crushed flat, over lives that had ended without witnesses. When they spoke to the man, they did not ask how he had survived at first. They asked what he had done differently. He did not answer with pride or instruction. He did not speak of genius or foresight. He spoke only of winter as it was, not as people wished it to be. He explained that snow does not test strength, it tests shape. That wind does not challenge walls, it exploits corners. That fire feels like safety until it steals the air meant to keep you alive. That roofs do not fail because they are weak, but because they invite weight to sit where it should never be allowed to rest. Some listened, some nodded politely and moved on. Others looked at the curved roof and said nothing, because the evidence was already standing behind him in clear daylight. As the village was slowly uncovered, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every flat roof told the same story: load collected, beams bowed, collapse followed. In contrast, the rounded shelter showed no scars beyond snow piled harmlessly around its base. The structure had not fought winter. It had avoided becoming a target. It had given snow no place to stay and wind no surface to attack. The man understood then that survival was not about enduring more cold than others, but about refusing to invite danger in the first place. He had learned that lesson too late for his family and just in time for himself. That knowledge weighed heavier than any snowfall. People spoke about rebuilding. They talked about stronger beams, thicker stone, more firewood. A few asked about curves, about slopes, about why his roof had worked when theirs had failed. He answered when asked, quietly, without urgency, because urgency belonged to storms, not to rebuilding. He knew most would return to what felt familiar. Tradition is comforting even when it is deadly. Winter would come again, and most people would prepare the same way they always had. Because changing the shape of a house is harder than stacking more wood or trusting a bigger fire. When he stood beside his shelter in the open light, there was no sense of victory, only confirmation. The house had not saved him because it was clever or strange. It had saved him because it respected rules that winter never breaks. Weight moves downward. Wind seeks resistance. Cold settles where air is trapped. Fire consumes oxygen whether you need warmth or not. His roof was round because winter punishes flatness. His walls were smooth because winter feeds on edges. His shelter was small because space wastes heat. These were not innovations. They were observations paid for with loss. In time, the village would be remembered for the storm that erased it, not for the choices that made it vulnerable. The man would be remembered, if at all, as the one who survived. But survival was not the point of his story. The point was that winter does not reward courage or tradition or confidence. It rewards preparation that aligns with reality. Long before the snow fell, long before the laughter faded, winter had already chosen what would stand and what would fall. The storm only revealed the decision. When rebuilding finally began, it happened without ceremony, because grief drains people of speeches and explanations, and the land itself seemed unwilling to return to what it had been. New walls rose slowly. Roofs were framed with heavier beams. More firewood was stacked than ever before. Some roofs were made steeper. A few were rounded slightly, not enough to change everything, but enough to show that winter had left marks deeper than memory. The man did not stay long after that. He helped where he could, said little, and worked without instruction, because the lesson he carried was not something that could be taught quickly or accepted easily. He understood that survival stories make people uncomfortable when they suggest that death was not random, that it followed rules, that it might have been avoided. It was easier for others to believe he had been lucky than to believe they had been wrong. So he packed what little he needed and stood one last time beside the house that had carried him through the worst cold of his life. The curved roof still intact, the walls still quiet, the shape unchanged by everything winter had thrown at it. In the clear daylight, with no storm to dramatize it, the truth felt almost ordinary, that winter had not spared him out of mercy, but because he had stopped challenging it, because he had built something that did not argue with weight or invite wind or depend on fire to compensate for bad design. As he walked away, the village behind him looked smaller than it ever had, not because it was gone, but because it had been measured against forces it never understood. The story people told afterward would focus on the storm, on the cold, on the deaths, on the idea that it had been the deadliest winter they could remember. But the quieter truth would remain buried beneath those words, that winter does not decide in the moment, it decides long before, in the shapes people choose, the habits they repeat, and the warnings they laugh at. His roof had been round, theirs had been flat. And when winter came, it did not hesitate. It simply followed its rules and left behind a lesson written in snow, silence, and one house still standing.